It was a bitterly cold morning, the kind that made your bones ache and your breath turn to mist as soon as it hit the air. I just stepped out onto my small balcony, still rubbing the sleep from my eyes, when something unusual caught my attention. On the street below, huddled against a broken fence, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, and yet she carried herself as if the weight of the world rested on her fragile shoulders. Her clothes were tattered, dirt smudged across her tiny face, and her eyes told a story of hunger, fear, and abandonment that words could never fully capture. I froze for a moment, unable to look away. There was something magnetic about her vulnerability, something that pulled at my heart in a way I couldn't ignore. Without thinking, I grabbed a small bag I always kept in the kitchen for emergencies, some bread, a bit of milk, a few pieces of fruit, and rushed downstairs. As I approached her slowly, careful not to startle her, she instinctively took a step back. She was tiny, and yet there was a fierce defiance in the way she held herself, a silent warning that she had survived far too much to trust anyone easily. I knelt down a few feet away, keeping my voice soft. "Here," I said, offering the bread. "Eat, you don't have to be afraid." For a long moment she just stared. Hunger was in her eyes, yes, but so was suspicion. She had clearly learned early on that food often came with strings attached. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and took the bread. The first bite was tentative, almost reverent, as if she wasn't sure she deserved it. When she finally swallowed and her eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't expected: relief, gratitude, and a quiet, desperate hope. That morning, I sat there with her, sharing the small meal I had brought. We didn't speak much, she was too wary, and I didn't want to frighten her, but her trust grew with every passing minute. By the time she had finished, she was leaning slightly closer, as if testing the waters of connection. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Days turned into weeks. I found myself looking for her every morning, leaving small meals, clean clothes, and sometimes just a kind word. She never spoke much about where she came from, only that she was hungry and alone. I named her Lily, after the delicate flower that somehow manages to bloom in the harshest conditions. Lily began to trust me, and little by little, a bond formed between us that felt unbreakable. But one day, everything changed. Lily appeared at my door, holding the hand of a woman I had never seen before. The woman's eyes were tired and weary, but there was also something else, a spark of hope, perhaps, or a desperate plea. Lily looked up at me, her small hand tightening around the woman's, and whispered, "Mom." I froze, unsure what to say. The woman's gaze met mine, and I saw in her eyes the same fear and hesitation I had seen in Lily's when we first met. But there was also recognition, a silent understanding that somehow this stranger, me, had cared for her child when no one else could. "Hello," I said softly, stepping aside to let them in. I fed her. She told me she was alone. The woman nodded, her lips trembling. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of her." As they stepped inside, I realized that my life was about to change in ways I could never have imagined. Lily looked up at me, eyes shining with a mixture of joy and hope, and whispered, "Can we stay with you?" The question hung in the air like a delicate thread, fragile yet full of possibility. I didn't have to think long before I answered, "Yes, yes you can." And in that moment, I understood that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could ripple through lives in ways you never expected. By simply feeding a hungry little girl, I had opened a door, not just to her heart, but to a new chapter in my life, one where love, hope, and family were no longer defined by blood, but by care, trust, and the courage to open your home to someone in need. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. Lily and her mother, whom I learned was named Sarah, slowly began to settle into my home. At first there was awkwardness, Sarah hovering near the edges, unsure if she was truly welcome, and Lily constantly glancing at me with a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. But little moments, small acts of trust, began to weave a delicate thread of connection between us. I still remember the first night they stayed over. I had prepared a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just some rice, vegetables, and warm bread. Lily sat quietly next to me at the table, her small hands folded in her lap, while Sarah hovered near the kitchen, her eyes flicking nervously between me and the food. When I invited her to sit, she hesitated for a moment and then quietly joined us. It wasn't much, but that shared meal became a symbol of the new life. We were slowly building together, a life where hunger, fear, and loneliness could be replaced with warmth, laughter, and security. Over the next few weeks, I learned bits of their story. Sarah had been struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Lily had often gone without proper meals, wandering the streets in search of scraps. It was heartbreaking to hear, but I also felt a deep sense of purpose. I realized that feeding Lily that first morning wasn't just an act of kindness, it was the beginning of something much larger, something that had the power to change all our lives. As the days turned into weeks, our bond grew stronger. We shared simple joys, cooking together, reading bedtime stories, taking walks in the nearby park. Lily's laughter, once so rare, began to fill the house. Sarah, too, began to relax, her shoulders losing the constant tension they had carried for years. It was as if the act of opening my home and heart had given them permission to breathe, to live without fear. But it wasn't always easy. There were challenges, financial worries, moments of doubt, and the occasional tension as Sarah tried to assert her independence, while still navigating the new dynamic between us. And yet, each challenge only strengthened our connection. We learned to communicate, to support each other, and to recognize that family could be built on love and trust, not just circumstance. One day, as we were sitting in the living room, Lily suddenly looked up at me with wide eyes. "Will you really let us stay here forever?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I paused, looking at Sarah, whose expression was both hopeful and fearful. "Yes," I said gently, taking Lily's hand in mine. "You don't have to worry anymore. This is your home and you are safe here." The relief that washed over Lily's face was indescribable. Sarah reached out and held my hand, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You didn't just feed her, you saved us." It was a powerful moment, one that reminded me of why acts of kindness, no matter how small they may seem, can ripple through lives in unimaginable ways. By simply offering food, trust, and care, I had given them not just a place to stay, but a sense of belonging, a chance to rebuild their lives. As the sun set that evening, casting a warm glow across the living room, I realized something profound. Sometimes, life gives you unexpected opportunities to make a difference. And when you embrace them, the rewards are far greater than you ever imagined. Lily curled up next to me on the sofa, Sarah leaning against the armrest. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. We were no longer just strangers sharing a fleeting moment. We were a family, bound together by trust, compassion, and the courage to open our hearts. From that day forward, I knew our lives would never be the same. The little girl I had fed on a cold winter morning had returned with her mother, and together they had brought more warmth, love, and purpose into my life than I could have ever dreamed. And as we faced each new day together, I understood one simple truth. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the course of lives forever. And to everyone watching this story, remember, every act of love, no matter how small, matters. If this story moved you, share it, support it, and stay with us for more inspiring tales. Because together, we can create more moments of hope, one heart at a time.